Good evening, everyone. I think we are going to get started. Welcome to this special program as part of the Newberry Genealogy Club and the Newberry Library. My name is Jake Fletcher, and welcome to Which Matthew O'Neill is Mine? Approaches to Irish Genealogy. I'll say a little bit about myself. You might notice that I'm younger than the standard genealogist. I was very fortunate actually to be interested in the subject through my own relatives. They have a lot of interesting stories and a lot of interesting relatives or ancestors, and that kind of captivated me. I also have a history background as well, so I've decided, a few years ago to turn a pastime into a profession. I work independently as a professional genealogist, meaning that I research for clients and help them with their brick walls, mostly in the northeastern United States and in Ireland and the British Isles. I also volunteer at the National Archives Boston Regional Center, which is in Waltham, Massachusetts. They hold a lot of federal records there for New England, and I do a lot of talks, and I'm currently Vice President of the New England Association of Professional Genealogists, so I'm very involved with the community. Now, this talk is geared towards a common problem with Irish research. I bet for all of you, there's at least one ancestor in your family tree who you know came from Ireland, but you don't know where exactly. And we want to know where, because I think that's an important part of the connection to our family history. Well, now, there are also many other challenges with Irish genealogy. The Irish were not very creative with how they named their children and themselves. So we can be looking at a particular area and there are hundreds or dozens of people with the same name. The names are very common, and it can be hard to separate those identities. In a lot of the records too that you might find on a particular person, there's conflicting evidence and discrepancies in the information. They might always give them a different age or different names of parents in the records that they leave. So that can be a challenge too. Now, in terms of Irish records as well, before the famine, the Great Famine, which was about 1840s, 1850s, we have a lot of brick walls because of the record losses. Two factors being the Catholic penal laws. So those started in the 17th century, where the Anglican Church, or Church of Ireland, the English essentially, repressed the Catholic Church and their ability to keep records. So what that means is that a lot of the parish records for Catholic churches don't start in Ireland until about the 1830s or 1840s. And many records were lost in a tragic explosion at the Public Record Office in Dublin. This was during the Irish Civil War, and a bomb went off in the Four Courts complex in Dublin, and many, many millions of records were lost to that explosion. So how do we work around this? Well, it's not all impossible, and there are many strategies that we can do to break through that Irish brick wall. So for this presentation, I'm going to talk about something called the fan principle, which I'll define for you in a bit. Records that are useful in locating Irish origin and identifying those fans. And this will mostly be a presentation focused on records in the United States. I advocate that you start researching your ancestor in American records or in the records of their adopted country, wherever they immigrated to, before you start going to Irish records, and you'll see why. And then I'll talk about some technology and techniques to help you separate these identities, because you're going to be collecting a lot of information and a lot of people that might be the same person, so I'll talk about that as well. Now, I talked about FAN, or the FAN principle. This was an acronym that was developed or coined by a genealogist, Elizabeth Shown Mills. She's very big in the field. She's done a lot of scholarship and work as a genealogist. Now, FAN stands for friends, or it could stand for family. The F, A would stand for associates, and N for neighbors. Now, I could also extend that to be fans, and I would make S stand for surname, and I'll talk about that later. But this is a good concept to know, because what we're doing is we're going beyond our target family or our family of interest. We're looking at the people that our ancestor interacted with. Think of like on your Facebook page today, all of the people that you're friends with on Facebook would be someone that someone would research as part of that fan. Now, how do we use the fan principle in genealogy? When our target family or ancestor leaves us with a brick wall, we can use these fans to work around it in genealogy brick walls or challenging problems. It helps us in finding their place of origin because many immigrants, regardless of the nationality or country, would migrate in waves to the same place. So we can look at those people for clues. And you get to know a little bit more about your ancestor's story along the way when you research some of the families that are connected with them. Now, there are a number of records that you can use for finding Irish origins and identifying these fans in US records. I'm going to talk about a few of these, but at least to list them, you have census records, city directories, church records, cemeteries, probate, land records and maps, vital records, naturalization petitions, passenger lists, newspapers, military records, and other types of special collections, which I will define later. Now, to learn more about where you find these records, it all depends on the location, because depending on the location, different records have survived. There have been disasters and fires over the years and other circumstances that led to record losses. The first place that I go to learn about records or their availability in a particular county or state is the Family Search Wiki. It's a feature of FamilySearch.org. That's the genealogy website for the Church of Latter-day Saints. And their wiki has been put together by different experts who provide information on how to do research in a particular location. You might also want to try other resources, such as local historical and genealogical societies. There are people there with a wealth of knowledge about the records in that area, libraries as well. Periodically, there are published genealogy directories, or if you call them, or reference works, that do have some of this information compiled, but it does go out to date because the nature and location of records are changing, particularly because they're being digitized so heavily these days. And that leads me to my next point, which is to continue your genealogy education. If you're serious about this, come out to talks like this one, join a local society, think about going to the local conferences happening so you can stay up to date with the genealogy world. Now, the first record type of source I'm going to talk about is church records, and that's because in church records you have the godparents listed in baptisms, you have the witnesses to marriages. These are people that are very close to your ancestor, and they need to be pursued in your research if you can't figure out the Irish origin. I have solved many brick wall cases when the couple being married or the family that was having their children baptized, their records didn't say anything about where they came from in Ireland, but I looked at the godparents and who they were, and it allowed me to get back to that specific origin. About where to find church records, though, it all depends on the church. There are archives. For example, the Archdiocese of Boston has an archive that only collects Catholic church records within Boston and the surrounding cities. Most other churches in this state, like Western Mass and Central Mass, their church records or sacramental books are still going to be held within the parish. So you actually need to go and contact them and have a staff person research for you, or ideally go research there yourself. And there are other archives as well. You have to do a little bit of digging to find out where they might be. Yes?
Can you just go to the Archdiocese of Boston and have access to...
They have an archivist there, and they'd be happy to have you come in if you set up an appointment ahead of time. The next big source I'm going to talk about is the census. Now, the census was taken every 10 years in the United States, and the states also took their own individual census as well. Massachusetts, I believe, was 1855 and 1865. Those are available for research online. Now, the key thing about using the census in Irish research is not just to locate your own family, but to look at the people living around them. You notice there's a lot of people who give their place of birth as Ireland. These people all might have come from the same townland or parish in Ireland. So it's a good general rule of thumb is when you locate your family in the census, whatever it may be, look about 5 pages before and 5 pages after, so you can at least examine the whole neighborhood or block within the city to find out more about who's living nearby. You might see some names or surnames that stand out to you, or other patterns as well. Along the same line, city directories. City directories help fill in the years between the census because they were done annually. And although they do give less genealogical information, they will at least provide the name, possibly the first name of the spouse if they're married, their street address, their occupation, and their place of occupation, and sometimes if they removed or passed away within the year. Now in some city directories, they'll list them alphabetically, like surname by surname, as you've seen mostly, but also sometimes they put the heads of household by street. So it's kind of like the census in that way, where you can actually go and look at the people living in that neighborhood, and there might be some neighbors or names in there that stand out to you. So again, the concept is just to look around the family, look at the neighborhood when you hit that brick wall. Same thing with cemeteries. Don't just look at your ancestor's headstone, but look at the people buried within that plot or nearby. It's not a coincidence that they are all buried within the same area. Now, to find cemetery records and to do cemetery research, you can always contact the office, or sometimes the office is within the church. A lot of cemetery headstones are being transcribed online with websites like Find a Grave, Billion Graves, Interment.net is another one. Just so you know, you don't have to worry too much about writing down everything that I say. I should have said this at the beginning. I do have handouts on my website which are free, and so hopefully that will allow you you don't have to worry as much about writing everything down, but it has a lot of these links for the different types of record groups that I'm talking about, and will help you. Continuing along with cemeteries, some cemeteries have their own internal databases. It might be a good idea just to Google the cemetery you're interested in. They might have a website or some kind of genealogy search request that you can do. This is the Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. It's a very large Irish American cemetery in New York, and they have all of their tombstones or headstones transcribed online. And if you notice, you can sort it in several ways. They have the lot and section number. So when you're searching for a particular name, look at this information. If there's anyone buried in the same lot or section of the cemetery as your ancestor, that could be a clue as to a close relationship. Now moving on to what we call immigration records, mainly naturalization petitions and passenger lists. Those are very important in doing Irish research because many Irish became citizens of the United States. There's a big difference in the amount of information a petition will give depending on the time period. This is due to some of the federal laws. But before 1906, when they changed the petition form and the amount of questions that were offered, it's generally less helpful because a lot of them will only list their birthplace. The petitioner will only list their birthplace as Ireland. Now there are some exceptions. I've seen some courts where the clerks actually do write down the parish or town land for their Irish ancestor, so that is lucky with these older naturalization records. They also ask for their current town of residence, when they were born, when they arrived, and there are 2 witnesses to the naturalization, verifying that they've been within the country for a certain period of time. Now, take the information with a grain of salt because, like I said, the Irish didn't always give the information truthfully, or they didn't remember when they arrived or when they were born a lot, so that's something you need to keep in mind. The later petitions, post-1906 though, they do have a lot more information. They will always, almost always give the parish or town land of origin for the petitioner, regardless of country. It also asks for marriage information and the birthplace or the birth dates and residence of all of their children. So if you're finding a petition post-1906, you're a little bit luckier because the information is more helpful and abundant in these records. Like I said, look at the people witnessing the naturalization, the ones providing affidavits for their residents. These are people that knew your ancestor well and people that you need to pursue in your research. How do we find naturalization records? A lot of the older ones, I'd say up to about the 1950s, are online. FamilySearch.org has a great collection of free naturalizations for New England. These were digitized at the National Archives at Boston. These are all the New England petitions up to, from the earliest ones up to 1906. Ancestry has a lot of them as well, including the indexes. A lot of times you might find an index card for a petition, and that gives you the volume and page number and the court and date, and that will lead you to finding the original record. If you want to request a copy of a federal naturalization record, if you just want the copy, you can give that information from the card to the appropriate National Archives or NARA facility, and they'll send you a copy for a pretty reasonable charge. Now that's for federal petitions, or those naturalizations that occurred in a federal courthouse. If it's a state courthouse or a county courthouse, those generally are not the National Archives. There are a few volumes, but those are generally going to be at the state archives, like the Massachusetts State Archives, near the JFK Library. I think it's Dorchester, technically. But, and then there are also sometimes the petitions in the courthouse itself. Another way you can search for naturalization is through the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. They have a genealogy search, and that can be helpful, particularly with the 20th century naturalization records, and they'll send you the documents for a fee as well. Now, passenger lists began in 1820 because that's when Congress required that the United States Collector of Customs keep a copy of the manifest of all civilian passengers arriving into U.S. ports. So the earliest passenger lists go back to 1820. They only list the name, age, gender, occupation, and country of birth. It's not until the Immigration and Naturalization Service, formed in 1883, they changed the passenger manifest form to have a lot more questions. So in terms of genealogical research, it becomes more helpful. Now this is an example of one of those passenger lists. You might have seen that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the questions that they have. I was helping out a friend of mine. Oh, let me take that off. Okay, it's gone. Sorry about that. So I was helping out a friend of mine who was going to Ireland and wanted to know, okay, where am I from in Ireland? I want to go to the town. So when I was doing research, I did find that information. And what was interesting about his ancestors' passenger list is that there were a lot of people coming from the same town on that boat to New York City. As you can see over here, it gives the townland or parish that they came from in addition to the county, and it's the town of Louisburg, which is a coastal town in County Mayo. So in addition to that, the immigration officer would ask, okay, who is your nearest relative in Ireland as well? So often you can get a parent or relative that is still living in Ireland, and it gives the town and even the street or townland or a particular parcel of land that they're living on. So this can be extremely helpful when you're doing Irish research because you have that specific location. And it also asks what town or city they are heading to. And if you notice, a lot of people from Louisburg were actually going to work at the factories in Clinton, Massachusetts, some other industrial towns and cities as well. So the later passenger list can help you a lot with your Irish brick wall, but most of the Irish immigrants, or the famine migration, was in the 1850s, so this predates when these passenger lists were being used. So you only get the ones with less questions. Now, where to find passenger lists? There are several places. The originals and the microfilm are at the National Archives because they're federal records. Most of this collection, if not all of it, is digitized on Ancestry.com and Family Search as well. Family Search, if you haven't used it, is completely free, so you can get these records for free. Now, I would use these two websites in conjunction with Steve Morse's website. It's called One Step Web Pages. And basically, he offers a different search engine that has a little bit better of an algorithm for catching some of those crazy spelling variations and misspellings and things like that. So you can use that site as a portal to searching the other databases as well. Now, for New York passenger list, they're also available at the Ellis Island website and Castle Garden website. Castle Garden predated Ellis Island. It was the Immigration Processing Center up until 1891, I think, and then Ellis Island took over in the 1890s. I would always check newspapers on your ancestor. There are many Irish American newspapers in some of the major cities as well, but newspapers can provide a lot of information on not just your ancestor's life, well, particular incidents that happened within your ancestor's life and other things like that. Now on the left here, I put this article in here because it's very interesting, or it helped a lot in my research. So my O'Neill family, according to legend or what was passed down from relatives, they came from County Cork, they were mariners, and they came to San Francisco in the 1850s. So I always assumed County Cork. But in here we have, this is my great-great-grandfather, Matthew O'Neill. He was a founding member in a new Irish society. There are many of these Irish societies or fraternal organizations in cities to help kind of preserve the culture and the Gaelic heritage. But they all gave their county of origin. And he says here County Antrim. Now, knowing that he gave this information, he very well knew where he came from in Ireland. This completely changed the trajectory of my research. I was looking for O'Neills in County Cork, which is Southern Ireland, the very southern part of Ireland, and now County Antrim, that's part of Northern Ireland, and that completely, changed the trajectory of my research. So you never know what you're going to find in newspapers. And right here is an obituary for my 3 times great-grandfather, Patrick Edward Connor. He was a Civil War general, an Indian fighter, and many other things as well. And you can use obituaries and things like that to get some biographical information, particularly if they are prominent in the community. Now, for Irish American citizens, there are some particular collections that are very helpful in doing research, particularly in the famine era or that time period. The Search for Missing Friends is a collection of Irish immigrant advertisements that were placed in the Boston Pilot. This was a very popular column in the Boston Pilot because many families were displaced during this massive wave of migration. They wanted to track down other family members. So they put an ad in there asking, where, if anyone knew about one of their family members, and they would more often than not give you the town, land, or parish of origin of that family. So when we're doing research in the 19th century in Irish, this is an extremely important resource. Another one that is available is information wanted ads in the Truth Teller, New York City. That's only in print, that hasn't been put online like the Search for Missing Friends, but if you go to the Haiti Trust Digital Library, you can at least search the text and we'll give you page numbers for where a particular name appears. If your Irish American ancestor served in the military, you might be in store for a lot of records about them because the military, particularly the US military, kept a lot of records, including pensions and bounty land warrant applications. There are draft cards for World War I and World War II. For the modern military records, you have personnel files, a compiled folder with all the records mentioning them and orders and things like that. In the older conflicts, let's say pre-World War I, you do have compiled military service records on those cards, and sometimes they have enlistment and discharge certificates. There are also references to the original muster rolls or company order books of the outfit that they were in. And there are also special collections like burial records, applications for headstones, and they might have been admitted to a veterans home or hospital, and those records are available as well. Because the military is a federal organization, these are predominantly National Archives records, so those are mostly available there or online. Now, you could probably go through a muster roll and find a lot of these friends, associates, and neighbors, the fan club of your ancestor, because a particular outfit was usually made up of people living nearby. So you could go through the muster roll and see people that your ancestor was living with before they served in the military. Now there are some special collections as well that I want to talk about. What are special collections, though? I would say I would say it defines the sources that people know less about in genealogy and things that are only available in archives and manuscript form. It can be a challenge to sometimes locate these. So what I would suggest doing is doing some browsing. A good website to start with is Archive Grid, and that's through the World Library catalog called WorldCat, and is solely a catalog of manuscript materials and archive materials, so you can start searching there. Going back to the Family Search Wiki, there's always a directory of let's say like different historical societies, libraries, and repositories, so you can get the websites through that and then go and browse through their collections and finding aids. Also, the Family History Library, which is in Salt Lake City, has a catalog. They have millions of microfilms. Try doing some searches in there to find different kinds of collections. Now, the key thing to do is to do keyword searches with either the surname, the location that you're researching, or perhaps a particular organization or other keyword. You just want to try these searches to find records that might be relevant to your project. And once again, continuing your genealogy education, you'll learn about these as you go. Now, the types of special collections I'm talking about are institutional records, so that's records of schools, state hospitals, almshouses, poorhouses, places where the needy and destitute went when they couldn't live on their own. Unfortunately, this was the case with a lot of Irish. They often were sent to these poorhouses, so you might want to check to see if those records survive for where they live, because they might have gone there, and that might help with more clues. There are also bank records, particularly at the Harvard University Library. One of their libraries, they have many series of old bank records for Boston and New York and the Northeast. Voter registrations as well. There might be records of a particular company or business, and your ancestor might appear in those. And then also many family papers and diaries get donated to these archives. So you want to keep an open mind and try different searches for special collections like this. A lot of Irish Americans joined fraternal organizations, including the Freemasons, the Catholic Order of Foresters, Knights of Columbus, Ancient Order of Hibernians, and Catholic Daughters of the Americas, and many others. A lot of these records still survive from these organizations, so you could potentially find the birthplace of your ancestor in these records. The Irish Ancestral Research Association actually, a few years ago, they indexed all of the forester records, the insurance applications for members of the Order of Foresters. And once those were indexed, they sent them to the Healy Library at UMass Boston. So if you go to tiara.com, I think, they have an index of all those insurance applications, and you can order the copies of the application from UMass Boston. And these other organizations have internal archives as well, so you can try to reach out to them and see if they have records of your ancestor. Also, using some secondary sources or literature to learn about the Irish American community that your ancestor was a part of is very helpful. You get to learn about the prominent Irish American citizens. That could be helpful if your ancestor was one of them, but also the churches when they were founded, the different cemeteries, and the different organizations and businesses founded by Irish Americans. So you can try searching catalogs for books. The city directories are a good place to find information about this. Vertical files at libraries, so going back to special collections, a lot of researchers over the years might have compiled, different newspaper clippings or documents pertaining to the local organizations or churches within that town. So that might be something that you can find at your local library or the library you're interested in. And then at the bottom here, this is PERSI. That stands for the Periodical Source Index. It's an index or catalog of all the genealogy periodicals. So a lot of societies publish periodicals and different research techniques, but also family histories on a regular basis, and those are indexed in PERSI, which you can get at Heritage Quest or Find My Past, two large databases. Now that I've covered records, I'm going to talk about some strategies for separating identities. So we need some tools to help us with our brick walls. So I'm going to talk about a few of those. Has anyone become familiar with the genealogical proof standard? So a couple of people? All right, well, the genealogical proof standard was created a few years ago by the Board for Certification of Genealogists. It's not a set of laws or requirements. It's what I think of it as is a guide to helping you with your research and to think more critically. And it's boiled down to 5 components. So reasonably exhaustive research, complete and accurate source citations, critical test of evidence through processes of analysis and correlation, resolution of conflicting evidence, and then those 4 components lead to the soundly reasoned, coherently written conclusion. So it's merely advocating for you to, be more careful and documented with your research and to think more critically about your evidence. Now, I use timelines when I'm doing research because it's a good method for kind of visually seeing the information and comparing the information. It's very easy to create a timeline. I'm going to step over here and just show you one for an Irish ancestor. So as you see, you can simply compile all the dates, records, sources related to your ancestor and put it in one timeline. Now the thing with Irish research is that there are people living around your ancestor that you might find in your research that you might think are the same person, or you want to at least have some conclusion that they're a different person so that you have some solidity as to who's a part of your family tree. So when we put all the known information in one timeline, we can put these questionable or possible matches in another timeline and see how they add up with like the date and location. So in most cases, there are exceptions, but someone can't really appear in the census twice. So looking at that, 2 Matthew O'Neills in the 1870 census, one in Pittsfield and one in Adams, Massachusetts, it's a good indication there are different people. Now when there are gaps, so Matthew's first wife died in 1882, and then there's the possible Matthew O'Neill married again in 1885. That does fit within the chronology of this person, so that could actually be something that we merge into our ancestor. So I do this because like I said, we're trying to compare and see if these are 2 different people or similar people, and a timeline, creating a visual timeline is a really good way to do that, and it's a really simple trick for doing something like that. Okay, now again, I talked about analyzing the evidence. We want to look closely at the provenance and quality of the sources and the information that they provide. This helps us to resolve some of that conflicting evidence, like when our Irish ancestor says they were born in one record in 1840 and then another record 1850. That's a very large time period, and that leads us to believe, okay, could this actually be the same person because it's such a large gap? Now you could simply, make another table where you just put all the bits of all the birth dates, known birth dates from the records and the source that they came from. And from there, you got to do a little more critical thinking. So thinking about the quality of the source. Is it an original source? Is this an original record that was created by the clerk or the government or something like that? Or is it a derivative? Was it transcribed or perhaps manipulated in some way which means that there's more room for error. Now, the last category here, authored work, that kind of applies to, you know, something like a family history done in a periodical or published, where the researcher, you know, has looked at all these different sources and has interpreted them and has made a conclusion about the identity and history of that family. So that's the first step. We figure out what type of source this is. Then we look at the information, because sources can have different kinds of information within it. Think about a death certificate. You had someone who had to go report the death. They knew fairly well, you know, when the death happened and where it happened, because they probably witnessed it, or were at least near enough to know, you know, when it happened. But what about when it asked for the names of the parents? Did they know who the parents were? Did they know the parents personally? They might have just put down, you know, some arbitrary names just to, you know, fill the question, or sometimes they did leave it blank. But when you look at each piece of information on a record, there might be times when we say, this doesn't exactly add up. You know, it might not be an accurate piece of information. And, you know, so it's either primary information or secondary information, depending on whether that informant or creator of the record had firsthand knowledge. Sometimes we can't determine that, so it's simply indeterminable. The next thing that we look for is, after the type of source and information is determined, what kind of evidence does it give us? Does it directly answer the research question? A birth certificate or birth record will directly answer or give a direct answer to when that person was born. But other times we get things that indirectly answer the question. So going back to the friends, associates, and neighbors, we see people living nearby, or, you know, there's, like, for example, you know, godparents on a child's baptism record. That's indirect evidence that they knew each other well, and that they, you know, they could have come from the same townland in Ireland. So again, sometimes it doesn't always directly answer the question. And then there's negative evidence. So the absence of a person or a particular thing or event can provide some information as well. So the point is just to look at sources more closely and see, you know, is this accurate or is this not accurate? Now, technology and techniques for fans. What I mean by this is that we are collecting a lot of data, a lot of names and people, and so we want to do this in an organized way. When we're studying these Irish American families, we're looking for patterns of chain migration. So in chain migration, our ancestors followed each other to the same place in most cases. One townland would get up and leave, and they'd go work in a particular town or city or for some company. That happens more often than not. So we're looking for those patterns to help prove that our ancestor came from a particular place. So we're researching, we're tracking the fans of our ancestor. We also want to look at the surname in a particular location to prove or disprove relationships. Are they part of the same family? And locations as well. And again, it's all about looking for patterns in the data. Another thing I like to do is to search databases by place instead of name. So leave out the names and just look for locations and see if there are any patterns as well. So when you're going through your records, look for the people that would be considered the friends, associates, and neighbors. Create a list that also identifying the document that they came from, and just research them like you would your own family. Collect those records, get biographical detail, see where it leads you in your research. They may or may not be from the same place in Ireland. Now again, along the same line, tracking a surname, you might have a lot of O'Neills or O'Briens or McDonalds living in a particular city, and that is very challenging because we want to, you know, it doesn't help us when there's 10 or 20 people with the same name living in a particular area. But honestly, you have to collect that data because even if it's time consuming, it will help you in figuring out who these families are and where they came from. So start with the census, then the city directories, then you can move on to other record collections as well. Now the way that I collect this data is in a spreadsheet software like Excel. And it's just, it's relatively easy to use. You can create as many columns of information as you need, depending on the type of record, so that then you can then sort the data to show particular patterns. And that can lead you to some conclusions in your research. I'm going to show a quick video of just how to sort the data in Excel. Sorry. Okay. So you click on a particular, this is the city directories, you click on the address column, you go up to the sort tool, and you can do ascending or descending. And then once you sort it, it puts it all alphabetically by the street name. And so when you're collecting a lot of data, this can help because you can see the people that are living on the same street. And that can indicate a family relationship or a close relationship of some kind. And you can do this with any number or type of records or pieces of information. It's all about sorting it to show patterns and to lead you further along in your research. Now again, going back to searching a database by place, I could go to familysearch.org, go to their World War I draft card collection, which is which is millions of males who registered for the draft, and I could simply put in, birthplace or place of origin, County Kerry, Ireland, living in Massachusetts, and I would get, a couple hundred people, and you can start to go through those results and see, are there any people that might be familiar or have the same name as my ancestor, things like that. You can do this with any kind of database, but it's a good way when you stop focusing on names and location. It can help to see, okay, maybe these people all came from the same place in Ireland, something like that. Now, once you do have some conclusions about where your Irish ancestors came from, then we can start, crossing the pond and going into Irish records. But once again, we have to do some locality research because there are oftentimes, there will be many places that have the same name. So how do we find Irish place names? Before we do that, we need to understand a little bit of background on the administrative divisions of Ireland. You have the 4 historical provinces, and within that, I believe you have 32 counties in Ireland, including the 6 counties in Northern Ireland. They're a lot like the counties that we have over here in the States. Within that, you have 2 different divisions of parishes within the counties. You have the Catholic parishes and then also the Church of Ireland parishes. That's something to keep in mind because they don't comprise the same borders. And it will be completely different. It will lead you in a completely different direction in your research. Ireland also created poor law unions. These poor law unions were for the workhouses because many Irish were poor. They set up these districts with a centralized workhouse in there. The only reason that these are significant to us as researchers is that they form the bounds of the civil registration districts. So in 1864, the Irish government began registering births, marriages, and deaths, and they did it by these districts, which were originally the poor law unions. Now, the smallest unit in the parishes in the registration districts are the townlands. That's what you want to find in your genealogy, is you want to know the townland that your ancestor came from. That will bring you the closest to actually where they lived in Ireland. Now, a townland isn't a specific size. It could be 1 or 2 acres of land. It could be a street within a city, or it could be thousands of acres. They're just essentially local place names that the locals there use to identify the land that they live on. They kind of have roots in sort of the landlords, and the names came from many hundreds of years ago. But anyway, so how do we research these Irish place names? Well, there are a few databases. Townlands in Ireland, townlands.ie is a good search engine. Most of these are based off historical records like the 1851 census, an index to the townlands listed there. John Grenham's website is a good place to start. John Grenham is an expert on Irish research. He's probably the authority on Irish genealogy, and his website is a great place to start getting this information. The IRE Townland database is a similar one, and then you also have many historical maps, including the Ordnance Survey of Ireland maps. Now, talking about John Grenham's site, that's where I usually start when I have a place name that I want to look up. Has anyone heard of the town Menlo Park, California? Okay, so it's my great-great-grandfather founded that town, and it was named after the townland of Menlo in Galway. For some reason, it resembled where he lived in Ireland, so he gave it that name when he settled there in the 1850s. So I looked up Menlo, and as you can see, there is one Menlo, but if you do a search with an asterisk, or called a wildcard search, which picks up all the place names that include that name, there are several other place names that have Menlo in there as well. So tentatively, it could be any one of these, but when you do a place name search on John Grenham's website, when you have the place or townland, it gives you the county, the civil parish that it belonged to, not the Catholic parish, the civil parish, the poor law union, or the registrar's district. So you need to know this because when you're looking for records, location is everything. Now, we could go back and we could click on the civil parish here, and John Grenham's website will give us all of the adjoining parishes. It'll give us a link to the Ordnance Survey map for that parish, so we can actually look at a historical map of the area, and links to the 1901, 1911 Irish Census. When I'm talking about that fire that happened, or that explosion, basically all of the 19th century Irish Census records were wiped out. So that is a huge loss for us. So we only have really the 1901 and 1911 census in any complete form. And there are other records as well. So this is kind of like, his site is kind of a portal to getting started and finding records once you have that location. I'm going to play another video as well. I like using Google Earth for genealogy a lot. It is a great tool for mapping out locations. So I can zoom in here, and then that little person on the right drags me to Street View. Google Earth is going to take me down to the street level and show me what my ancestor's town looks like today. And I can, pan around and look at things, and I can even compare, if I have historical photographs, see that monument right there? In the second, an old photograph of the same place is showing up. So you can do a lot of comparisons of the property, of the land. It's an amazingly useful tool for genealogy, regardless of the research that you're doing, because it maps out all the locations. Now, where do we go from here? We know we've done our research. We have a conclusion on, okay, we know the parish or townland that they came from. Now, how do we find more records? I won't have time to talk about all the records available, but I'll at least give you the key ones. So Catholic Parish Registers, and Church of Ireland Parish Registers as well, records of the church. Most of these are online now, which is great. The earliest Catholic Parish Registers to 1880 have been digitized on the National Library of Ireland's website, and they're completely free. However, they are not indexed, so you need to know the approximate date and parish and go in and look at the images to find your ancestor. But they are indexed on the subscription sites, Find My Past and Ancestry. So if you can get onto one of those, you can search through the index and find things as well. A lot of the Anglican parish registers, the Church of Ireland parish registers, were wiped out in that huge explosion. But those that have survived are mostly on this website here, ireland.anglican.org. If you go to their genealogy link, it will take you to their digitized transcripts of the parish registers, not the originals. And then for Northern Ireland, those church records are not online. They're mostly on microfilm in Londonderry at the Public Record Office of Northern Ireland, or called Crony. And there are other records there as well. So if you have Northern Irish ancestors, that's a place you want to start. I talked about the civil registration of births, marriages, and death. This began in 1864 in Ireland, with the exception of non-Roman Catholic marriages, started a little earlier, about 1845. So these are like birth, marriage, and death certificates that were reported by an individual in the family. The originals are in Dublin at the General Register office. And up until recently, you had to go to the index on Family Search or on irishgenealogy.ie. The index doesn't give you the full record. Now think about it, there are probably 100 Patrick O'Connors living in Dublin that were born in the year 1873. You're going through the index and you kind of have to, originally you would have to guess which one is the right one and then spend money on a copy from the GRO in Dublin and hope that it was your ancestor. But that's actually starting to change because this website right here, irishgenealogy.ie, it's the basically the Ireland's government tourism website. They're starting to put images of these certificates online. It's only a select range of years and it's growing, but we can now at least look at the images on our home computer for free to verify if this is our ancestor, because these certificates and registers give a lot more detail than just the indexes. You can still use Family Search though for free and use the Civil Registration Index there. The other big set of records is the Irish Census and the tax records. As I said, the 19th century census schedules are almost all wiped out, but we do have the 1901 and 1911 census. So perhaps some descendants of your ancestor are in there, or perhaps your ancestor immigrated a little bit later than the big famine, so that could be helpful to you. For the 19th century Irish though, all we have are these tax records. So the Church of Ireland, they did several valuations of all the landowners and leasers of Ireland in these two collections here, the Tithe Allotment Books and Griffith's Valuation. Those are only going to give a name and a location. They'll give the name of the occupier, the name of the landlord or lessor, and some basic information on the worth of the property, maybe some description about what the house was like, things like that. So it is useful, but it's not as helpful as the census would have been because it gives the age and all the members of the household. So at least if you have the townland and some other information, you can verify it's your ancestor through the tax records. But be very careful because it only does list names, so it can be speculative. Now, as I said, the handout for this presentation, sorry I didn't print out copies for you, but you can go on my website, travelyourgenealogy.com. You go to, on the homepage menu, there's a research toolbox. It's basically my page for resources for other researchers and family historians to use. I have the handout there, and I also have an Irish genealogy online guide. So when you are using Irish records, you can use that as a reference for finding your ancestors. Now, just to wrap everything up, I'll quickly conclude the presentation. Hopefully, after listening to this, you are confident that Irish brickwalls are not impossible to solve, and I encourage you to use these techniques to go out there and try to find your Irish ancestor, such as the fan principle, timelines, analyzing the evidence, and technology to get to these genealogical conclusions. Check all possible records. I explained a number of records, but there are even more that are out there that I didn't explain. So really, when you're getting into genealogy, you want to know about every record that is available that might help you with your research. And then start, when you have some place names, some townlands, some parishes, specific locations in Ireland, research them and use that to lead you to where they exactly lived in Ireland. And then once that's done, you can go to Ireland and walk in your ancestors' footsteps. And that is a very cool thing to do. I've done it myself, and I encourage you all to do the same. So thank you for listening, and I hope it's been helpful. And